Not only is the U.S. the policeman, it is the U.S. is the hegemon. It's the boss. Not only will we keep order, not only will we blow up fishing vessels if we say that they're running drugs, not only will we commandeer oil tankers when we feel like it, as the United States has done a couple of days ago, we assert the right to tell the rest of the Americas who you can do business with and who you can't do business with. It's not that other countries can't interfere in the internal affairs. They can't even do economic business. They can't do trade. They can't do investment if the United States deems it so. So the Trump corollary is, we're the boss. We're the hegemon. We will do what we want. What Jeffrey Sachs is describing here is not influence, but control. The United States doesn't just see itself as a global security provider. It sees itself as the final authority over economic behavior. Who trades with whom? Who invests where? Which countries are allowed access to markets and which are not? This isn't leadership built on consent. It's hegemony enforced through pressure. And history is very clear on this point. Systems built on coercion don't generate stability. They generate resistance, fragmentation, and eventually push back. We will tell other countries, you will make contracts with American companies sole source. You will not deal with China. You will not deal with outside influence on so-called strategic assets. What are those? What we deem to be strategic assets. We will tell you who will invest in our hemisphere and who will not, and you will accept an American-led order. It's absolutely extraordinary. So, all of this is to say, Glenn, sorry for being long-winded, but this is a complete transformation of what James Monroe conveyed to the U.S. Congress in 1823, which was that Europe should stop its colonialism and stop its meddling and stay out, and will do the same vis-a-vis Europe. Now, it is a claim of bullying rights in the Americas, and everyone else stay out. Well, this is something, it's not a corollary. It's a completely different claim, and a quite outrageous one. Sachs's is describing a complete reversal of the original Monroe Doctrine, outlined by James Monroe in 1823. What began as a principle of non-inference has become a claim of control, where Washington decides who trades, who invests, and who is excluded. That's no longer doctrine, it's dominance. The United States doesn't have diplomacy in the normal sense of saying, well, we have issues with you, let's negotiate. When the United States doesn't like another government, as long as it's small enough, it says, we will change you. We will overthrow you. And there have been, of course, probably about 100 such regime change operations. What's being described here is the absence of diplomacy altogether. Negotiation is replaced by coercion, and disagreement becomes justification for regime change. When power goes unchecked long enough, overthrow starts to feel easier than compromise. And history shows that habit always comes back with consequences. Covert, meaning the U.S. tried to overthrow the government, and then lied about it, denied its engagement. So this is, what is first opposed in the Monroe Doctrine. Very attractive. Second, the Monroe Doctrine, as we both mentioned, is reciprocal, which is again completely forgotten. The United States says clearly, we will not meddle in Europe's affairs. That goes back actually to George Washington's farewell address, where he argues against entanglements in European affairs, that the United States should not become entangled in Europe's endless wars. So these are two attractive ideas, non-intervention and reciprocity, as a basic norm. What's being highlighted here is how far U.S. policy has drifted from its original principles. The Monroe Doctrine, articulated by James Monroe and reinforced by Guy, built on two ideas, non-intervention and reciprocity. Today, both have been abandoned, replaced by covert interference and selective denial, a reversal that undermines the very legitimacy the doctrine once claimed. I think they can be built into a legitimate system today, which we've discussed and which I call spheres of security. And by spheres of security, it is a kind of takeoff on the Monroe Doctrine, stated a little bit differently. But it is that the major powers, and by this I mean the large nuclear powers that can project power outside of their borders, the United States, Europe, Russia, China, India. I believe that these countries should respect the borderlands of the other great powers so as not to provoke what could become a nuclear war. And this would be one part. It's like the Monroe Doctrine. It says Russia or China should not intervene in the Americas, but the United States should not intervene in Russia's near neighborhood, Ukraine, Taiwan. And this would be reciprocal. What Sachs is arguing for is a modern update of the Monroe Doctrine, originally articulated under James Monroe, one based on reciprocity, not domination. The idea is simple. Major nuclear powers respect each other's security borders to avoid escalation. It's not weakness. It's restraint designed to prevent catastrophic war. But I would pair this with the good neighbor policy of Franklin Roosevelt, which actually worked and is very important. And yet another reason why I regard Franklin Roosevelt as the greatest American president. When he came into office, he said, "We will stop these military interventions of the United States in the Americas." And he did so. His vision was, we'll be a lot more secure ourselves if we have collective security in our region. So the idea of a sphere of security is a great power arrangement where the great powers say, we won't step over the red lines of other great powers to avoid global conflict. Something blatantly violated in the case of pushing NATO enlargement to Ukraine and to Georgia. But the good neighbor policy says that is not a license for Russia to run Ukraine or to run Georgia, any more than it's a license for the United States to run Mexico or to overthrow the government of Venezuela, which is what Trump is trying to do right now. So these are the two principles I would like. Non-intervention by great powers in the neighborhoods of other great powers, so that we don't blow up the world. But also saying to the great powers, you are not a bully in your hemisphere. You have no right of military intervention. You have no right to do exactly what Trump is doing right now in Venezuela. Sachs is combining restraint with accountability, drawing on the good neighbor policy of Franklin D. Roosevelt. He's arguing that respecting security boundaries doesn't grant dominance. Great powers avoid crossing red lines to prevent war, but they also lose any claim to bully governments in their own hemisphere. Stability requires both limits and responsibility, which is explicitly to destabilize Venezuela for the purpose of overthrowing a government that should not prevail. It's against the UN Charter, and my view is it's against U.S. security. Yes, we can do all sorts of things, but does it lead to good results? No. When you look at the lessons of Lindsay Orr's wonderful study, you find out that these regime change operations typically are disasters. Yes, maybe a government is overthrown, but what comes next? Typically, civil war, unrest, mass migration, economic collapse. The key point here is consequences. Regime change may look decisive in the short term, but history shows it rarely delivers stability. As studies by Lindsay Orr demonstrate, overthrowing governments often leads not to order, but to civil war, mass displacement, and long-term insecurity, outcomes that ultimately undermine U.S. interests rather than protect them. Right now, the view is everything in an economy is about the military, and so trade is breaking down because, quote-unquote, everything has dual use. This means, that technology could show up in some weapon. Therefore, we can't have trade. Therefore, we can't have supply chains. Therefore, we have to break apart of the international trade, finance, and investment system. This is a big mistake, and it's a kind of paranoid mistake, and it's putting the generals in charge of the economy. This is the danger of militarizing everything. When every technology is treated as a weapon, trade collapses, supply chains fracture, and economic logic is replaced by fear. Putting generals in charge of the economy doesn't create security. It creates stagnation and long-term instability. No thank you. This is not the right way to look at things. So I do think that great power accommodation is vital because of nuclear weapons, because the weaponry is very dangerous, because we're now escalating into autonomous weapons, into space weapons, into cyber warfare, into the new warfare of the digital age, drone swarms and all the rest. So the chances of great power confrontation are extremely high, and the drumbeats of war in our journalism, for example, in the West, is shocking. The New York Times ran a piece a couple of days ago of their editorial board about preparing for the future of war, which is disgusting. mind-boggling, in its, emphasis on getting ready for war rather than diplomacy. So I would like, yes, 4 or 5 of the great powers to sit down and work out, this, spheres of security, to understand, stop bothering each other, stop provoking U.S.-China conflict, stop provoking U.S.-Russia conflict. This is the point when it comes to the economy. First of all, I'm much less convinced that those 5 are in any sense the right 5, or that there's some kind of exclusive order on the economy, because the economy should be simply a win, economic improvement, and not a game of a few large economies in this sense. We have a multilateral economic order that was constructed over decades. The World Trade Organization is an example of that. The World Intellectual Property Organization is an example of that. The International Telecommunications Union is a part of that. IATA for civil aviation is a part of that. In other words, international norms for international economic behavior. And we have the G20, which Trump is out to break right now, because Trump doesn't want Indonesia and Brazil and South Africa and, Turkey and others at the table, even though these are very significant places with hundreds of millions of people. And Trump says, no, I'm going to choose a different list. And the list is mainly exclusionary for the economy. There's no reason for such exclusion. In fact, it's very dangerous. Our main goal should be collective prosperity. We should be very, pleased that the G20, African Union, and its 1.5 billion people, in the member states of the AU, into the G20 process. What happened, though, at the G20 recently in Johannesburg is that Trump boycotted it. He's a bigot. He's a racist. His base is like that for, what he appeals to. So he says, I'm not going to these places. This is a kind of racism that's a vulgar, actually. And it's a motive force, at least in Trump's imagination. I won't say other people can support him and be far from anything like that. But for Trump, that is actually a view. And so when he says, no, I'm going to have this group at the table for economy, I'm not only not persuaded, I find it very deliberate and annoying. He's leaving out the 1.5 billion people of Africa. He's leaving out the 700 million people of Southeast Asia in the 11 Asian countries. He's leaving out the hundreds of millions of people in Latin America. No thanks. The warning here is about escalation without restraint into cyberspace and autonomous systems. The risk of great power conflict rises sharply, replacing diplomacy with exclusion and militarization, even in the global economy, doesn't create security. It undermines cooperation and pushes the world closer to confrontation, not stability.